Yeah, great. So hello, everyone. My name is Will Masser. I'm the curator of contemporary fiction at the British Film Institute, and you get three for the price of one with our presentation because I'm joined by another colleague and also a friendly VR maker. So I'm going to let them speak now so that they come up on screen so you can remember their faces, because I'm going to control the presentation centrally. So I'll shut up. And Ersin, would you like to introduce yourself, and then Stephen?
Sure, thanks, Will. Thanks, everybody. This is really exciting. I'm Ersin. I'm an artist and director of London-based experiential collective Marshmallow Laser Feast. I'll give you a little bit of background on the project that we were working with BFI in order to archive one of our immersive pieces. So yeah, I'll leave it to Stefan for now.
Hey, I'm Stephen McConaughey. I'll just bang on about the usual stuff I bang on about: data modeling, systems architecture, and all the constraints they impose on activity. But I think we're starting with Will.
Yes. Okay, great. I'm going to share my screen now. Just give me one sec. Oh, share. Oh. Can you see the presentation? Hello? Anyone there?
Yes, we can.
Yeah,
see
we can see it.
Oh, great. Okay, good. Hold on. Let me just bring it up. Oh, sorry. I've got Wheel of Death on my computer. There we go. Can you see that?
Perfect.
It's
Great. Okay, so this is our presentation. It's called Leaps of Faith, Experimental Acquisition at the BFI National Archive. And just a little bit of context. So the National Archive was established in 1935. It's one of the largest film and television archives in the world. It's unique in the fact that it is both film and television. It collects across a range of formats, and its holdings are extremely diverse: feature films, television programs, experimental moving image works, animation, public information films, etc., etc. And in the most recent period, the BFI hired a curator of contemporary fiction. That is me. And although most of my time is spent looking at feature films and short films and what we might call, for the purposes of this conversation, flat media, I was also invited to consider how we could help develop the collections when it came to immersive media. And what we were then calling, back in 2017, new forms. The question being, why would we want to collect this stuff? Well, we have a royal charter that expects us to care for and develop the collections that reflect the moving image history and heritage of the United Kingdom. So there's the Royal Charter imperative. But also, around about 2015, it seems to me, film festivals like Sundance and Tribeca and some of the major festivals were starting to engage with VR and position it and contextualize it within the broader history of filmmaking. Obviously, as we all know, there are intersections with gaming and theatre, and these forms don't belong necessarily to any one history or discipline, but they seem to be an interesting confluence of many different influences. So we started to think about what we should do. How could we approach bringing some of these things into the national collection? In terms of preservation and future access, which I'm sure is going to come up a lot today. So in 2018, we started what we now call an experimental acquisitions pilot, and we decided on two projects that we identified as potential candidates to bring into the collection. Can you see the screen? I had some trouble earlier during the technical test. Can you see the two projects that I'm talking about now?
yes.
Great.
We can.
So the one on the left, which Ersan is here very kindly representing, is In the Eyes of the Animal, 2015, produced by Marshmallow Laser Feast, a creative studio in London. And the project on the right is a documentary called Notes to My Father, 2017, by a filmmaker called Jaisha Patel, who's based in the UK and who emerged from a short filmmaking, more linear, sort of traditional filmmaking background. And we deliberately chose two quite different projects in the VR or headset-based ecosystem because we wanted to understand the gamut or range of challenges that they might throw up. So Jaisha's project is a documentary. It's quite a hard-hitting documentary about sex trafficking in India, and it's a spherical video, 360 video. And we asked Jaisha if she would come in and talk to us and deliver the files. And it poses us, I think it's fair to say, although Stephen may want to speak this later, far fewer logistical challenges potentially in terms of identifying what we might go about putting into our digital preservation infrastructure. There are still questions remaining with regards to future access, of course. In the Eyes of the Animal represents a much different set of challenges given how iterative it is and the fact that it's computer generated and created in a games engine with all sorts of bespoke bells and whistles that I'll let Ersan talk about in a minute. I'm a curator in the archive, so a lot of my role involves interfacing directly with the industry to invite them to donate to the archive, to talk to them about their work and their preservation. And with immersive experiences, there are a number of issues that I became immediately aware of. Firstly, what exactly is it that we are hoping to collect, given the fact that many of these projects are contingent on multiple different pieces of hardware and software, given that they are often experienced in quite diverse settings, given that some of them require props or prop-based experiences to be experienced in the fullest sense as the artist intended. So complexity was an issue. Policy, our current collections policy doesn't allow for the collection of hardware or software. So that's something we really need to think about over the long term if we're going to properly engage with the acquisition of immersive experiences. Cataloging, to what extent is our current collections informations database set up to describe these works, and given the challenges on acquiring these works in their fullest sense, to what extent do we need to be more expansive in our cataloging and description of these kinds of works so that they're more easily understood from a sort of information searching and research perspective. Then there was the notion of tiered acquisition. What is it that represents a successful acquisition in the fullest term? If we can't, if it transpires that projects are simply too complex to bring in the sense that they are understood by the people who made them, then how could we collect around them to tell the story of those projects, either by looking at designs or documentation of where these works were experienced, or walkthrough experiences that are rendered in flat films that we could collect and preserve more easily. And then, of course, there's the very thorny issue of future access, which we are still very much working through. And I think the next phase of our experimental pilot will have to focus quite seriously on that. We have been, I think one of the things for me as a curator really is that acquiring these kinds of works is fundamentally going to change the donor-curator dynamic, because we can't really just approach makers and say, oh, we'd like to take that, give us your hard drive. We absolutely have to understand from the ground up how projects were made. Every project is different, needless to say. So we drew up a questionnaire. So I'm just going to come out of my presentation here now and just bring that up. I hope you can all see that. With thanks and credit to the V&A who helped us shape this, because they were working on something similar at the same time. So this is something, once our pilot has concluded or moved into the next phase, that we would give to curators as part of a toolbox that would allow them to better work with the makers to understand what the implications are for bringing in this kind of work. So you can see the sorts of questions that we're interested in here. So that's just to give you a flavor of the kinds of questions that we would need to build a portrait of the works before they came. Sorry, no, okay, don't worry. Effectively, it's just a questionnaire of questions, naturally, that we hope to develop as a part of a toolkit that curators will be able to use when they are interested in approaching potential donors to acquire their work into the collection. So it will ask questions like, it'll ask technical questions, but it'll also ask perhaps more searching questions about potential for obsolescence. How was your project first experienced? Where did it debut? What should we need to know in terms of the broader context of where the project has played so that we can talk about it descriptively in our cataloguing? What is the minimum threshold of acquisition acceptability for you as a maker, beyond which, if we were to slip, effectively we would not be bringing in your project anymore? So we designed that, and the V&A were working on something at the same time, and we shared notes. Well, they very much shared their slightly superior questionnaire, actually, if truth be told, which we've helped, which we've incorporated into ours. So the questions about thresholds of acceptability were really about what represents a good acquisition event for both makers and for the archive. How does the archive maintain its consistency and approach to best practice, while also doing right by the makers, so that if, God forbid, the makers no longer had access to their master files, that the archive would be a sound repository for them to come and approach it. So identifying project assets is something that came up in the last presentation. Obviously, that can be quite a complex thing, and we had a great round table with Ersin, who came into the BFI, and we looked at their file paths in Dropbox and agreed that it was extraordinarily complex. So we're currently working on identifying what the core properties would be that we would need to collect in order for the project, in inverted commas, to be able to run subsequently. And the final point I'll make just before I hand over to Ersin, and sorry for the technological delays, is looking at holistic acquisition. We have something in the BFI archive called Special Collections, which collects filmmakers' papers and posters and set designs, and helps to tell a broader history of film and television through the ephemera that is created as part of the production process. So this goes back to what I was saying about if we are anxious, which I think we all are, about what future playback is going to look like for these projects, and if we are currently unable to guarantee those things in the way that we might feel confident about doing for conventional film and television and other forms of moving image media, what can we collect around the edges? How can we provide as rich a contextual story for the projects that we're acquiring, so that at the very least researchers of the future, moving image enthusiasts, can understand the great immersive media boom of the late 2015 onwards, because it is our responsibility to chart that story as a moving image archive and look at its cultural and historical impact, even if we're not currently able to commit to the full fat preservation of these works. And that's what I meant when I said leap of faith as part of the title of this presentation, because we are slightly in that leap of faith mode. We know there are things that are precarious that are out there that we want to bring in. We want to work with makers to give them surety about the security of their work, but we have to do that hand in hand with the makers and develop a strong rhetoric as an archival community about the fact that we are in a phase of experimentation, and that governments and funders and our own internal colleagues understand the precarity of that as we work through these pilot phases. So that's me. I'm going to bow out now. Sorry for the delay. Ersin, over to you.
Oh, excellent. Thanks, Will, for really generous contextual information. So as Will mentioned, we've been through this journey for the last few years and tried to identify what this project is and how we can actually preserve an immersive piece that has so many components that are kind of aiming for a multi-sensory narrative rather than just an audiovisual component. But rolling back, in the Eyes of the Animal is actually one of the first work that we start focusing on a world beyond the limits of our senses, where we can embody a more than human narratives. And in 2015, Abandoned Normal Devices Festival and Forestry Commission commissioned us to create a site-specific experience or a piece. And then that piece turned into In the Eyes of the Animal, which we drew lots of inspiration from Jacob von Uxquell's Umwelt, embodying or understanding the sensory features of other species and how they perceive reality that is completely different than human-centric worldview. And using that as a starting point, working with National History Museum and Salford University to understand the sensory features, and we created an experience that makes you kind of embody 4 different species and how they see the forest through their sensory perception. As I mentioned, the 2015 was a year where we had the Oculus Rift, and that was the first headset that was affordable, and obviously it was incredibly cumbersome, and the drivers were ridiculous, and everything that you make from binaural soundscapes to enhance kind of graphic environments was relatively complicated, and everything was custom. And on top of that, we've used a number of different sensory stimuli, such as haptic feedback, which you are wearing a vest to feel the wings of a dragonfly, or the breathing of a frog. And the other part of the project was where we use a LiDAR scanner to kind of capture the environment and use that data to manipulate in real time based on the sensory features of those animals. So we ended up with this incredible high resolution representation of the forest. And since then, we've been continuing and employing similar tools and technologies when we are doing works around kind of more than human world. And we have gathered a colossal amount of data from that, which is also culturally and ecologically important, probably beyond the piece itself. And we don't know whether those places will exist in 100 years' time or by the end of this century. So that's like another side note, which I'll come back to. And that data that we gathered from Grisale Forest turned into the perception of different animals and insects. And over the course of the last 5 years, we have exhibited In the Eyes of the Animal around more than 25 countries, around 70 different biennials, galleries, festivals, forests. So it's been around the world quite a bit of time, and every inquiry we received, we tried to extend the core communication of the piece, where one can actually embody a different specimen and understand the world from a different point of view. In the wake of climate catastrophes, the message became even more important than the work itself. So we took every opportunity to extend how many people we can reach by kind of using the same core engine and the same core idea, but basically the same tool and the render engine, but extending the format into various different forms. As you can see here, this was in 2016, Ron Arad's curtain call at Roundhouse, which we rendered out the 360 video from that real-time piece and then projected onto this space where 200 people could experience at the same time, unlike one headset, one person. And then this kind of syndication, almost the adaptive content approach, became a form of preservation strategy for us, which we were not aware of in the beginning. I mean, as you all know, the budgets that we are operating doesn't allow us to include a preservation strategist or another developer just looking into that part of the project early on, which is incredibly important. And our conversation with BFI and this process made it so obvious that you have to employ those techniques, guidelines right at the beginning before you even start designing your project, in order it to be alive for longer than you imagine, or becoming an asset of the cultural landscape by just following those guidelines. So we came up with this kind of intuitive way of feeling and sensing and finding a way of extending the lifespan of the work itself by iterating in various different forms. And the place we arrived, obviously, that colossal Dropbox folder that Bill mentioned, is the consequence of that process. In one hand, we reached tens of thousands of people and tried to convey the core message, but also got to a point where if you were to archive this piece, what is the most important aspect of the project that needs to be stored? Can we even consider this as the original artwork if it's not in a forest and if you don't have the smell and the haptics, and knowing that the drivers and the custom engines and everything, they won't work in 2 years' time. And we've been kind of with our own expense, we've been trying to keep up with the technology from Oculus Rift to today. We probably updated at least 4 times the entire structure to keep going. So some other kind of nuances of the project. And so in that respect, I think this process was incredibly valuable and made it super obvious for us that we want to put our work into kind of a public domain with the protection or preservation of a cultural institution. But in order to do that, we have to employ certain things right at the beginning. So that became a guideline for us now when we work with enough resources. Now we are employing another developer to literally comment on every single line of code that anyone 10 years in the future can open that code base and rerun or recreate the project. So that's one part and technicality, and there are tools and techniques to do that. I'm sure there's a long conversation that Jacob mentioned. But then the other part, how do we preserve the experiential side of those projects? Is it a flat video that does the walkthrough, or do we go into incredibly detailed instruction, a set of instructions or descriptions? We don't know that part just yet, and hoping to kind of figure out step by step. So I'll leave this to Stefan. Sorry, I don't have your slides here, by the way. Shall we switch to yours?
I wonder, Will, do you have the whole PowerPoint that you might be able to share?
I do. I'm a little bit worried it's going to crash again if I do. Shall I try it?
Okay, yeah. I'll stop.
Okay, hold on.
Oh.
It's just opening.
So to wrap it up, and we came to a place where now a frozen system image is the core work itself, which has all drivers and entire Windows version, which works with specifications of some PCs, so anyone can actually emulate further down the line. The second part is all the rendered video content that we projected and used in full DOM format, in 360 format, in headset, on web. That goes into another well kind of described folder structure that anyone can access with the master files that anyone can also upscale the resolution further down the line. And the last one is a thorough analysis of all documentation that went into the project, and being able kind of somehow describing all nuances and how to recreate the work if anyone wants to do it in 50 years time. Still obviously in the process of, and then the Corona happened, we kind of paused the process, sadly, but hopefully within a few months time, we want to come to a place where this becomes a template for us when we are working in this field. We always follow the same structure.
Okay, so I've turned off video just to try and make this bandwidth work. Tom and Jack, I realise we're nearly 10 minutes over according to the first break schedule, so I'll make this super brief. Mercifully constrained talk about data modelling. So Will described the curatorial considerations. I'm just going to describe very briefly the data and digital preservation considerations. Two parts: data models, standards and practices, and then infrastructure. And next slide, Will, please. So in the BFI National Archive, we use the established data model for describing cinematographic works. It's called EN 15907, and I put some links in the Google document if you want to read up on that. That is a hierarchy, really. It deals with work, variant, manifestation, and item. And its focus is to achieve the complexity required to document the life cycle of a moving image work, which is a complex work. I mean, it's even true to say that flat moving image works are complex conceptually in terms of their life cycle. So this standard 15907 was developed and ratified by the European standardization body in 2011, and we use it to describe the BFI National Archive collections. We feel this standard can work for the type of works we're describing, because fundamentally they allow you to describe complexity of versioning and variation and manifestation. So they deal with a work as an abstraction, and then they deal with its various manifestations into the world, and then they deal with its various embodiments, items, physical and digital, and many ways to manage that complexity. So that really is the constraint around data modeling that we hope to use to describe these things, but we think that can work. Next slide, Will, please. So the other major constraint or consideration we have is our digital preservation and access infrastructures. We've built a very big, powerful, complex set of tools to manage really moving image ingest, preservation, and access. And that includes complex moving images such as DPX sequences. You can see a bunch on the kind of top left screen grab there. So those systems work very well for digital preservation of even complex moving image. What we don't, and I am confident that anything we preserve from this work can be safely preserved in that system as zeros and ones and retrieved safely as zeros and ones. On the right, the two things there are our predominant access platforms, the BFI Player online and the MediaTek and BFI South Bank. These cope very well with flat moving image and very high volume. And we do things clever with metadata like build map interfaces. We don't have anything to deliver access to virtual or augmented or other emerging AR and VR assets. It's unlikely we will build any platforms to deliver access until such point as critical mass of collecting would make that a BFI justified investment. So that's it from me, really. I just wanted to flag the data modeling and standards and practices constraints we have to work in, which I think are fine. The preservation infrastructure we have to work in, which I think is fine, because it deals with scale and complexity. However, our access infrastructure is really where this will not work. It will work to get the zeros and ones out perfectly and to drop them into a location, but it won't work to replicate the experience of the maker. So that's where we need to think hard about what is worth the investment and to what extent we can make that possible, given the small volume of acquisitions we're describing. That's it from me. I guess Will might want to round that up.
Yeah, no, I haven't got a huge amount to say by way of conclusion, other than we hope. I think just to build on Stephen's last point is, and one of the things that I need to do, or to develop rather, is that in conversations with potential donors, once we are through to a position with Marshmallow Laser Feast and with Jaisha Patel, where we feel like we have done the best possible acquisition that we are able to do within our constraints is then to work out as a curator what volume of acquisitions we could hope to do maybe on an annual basis, how I can share this knowledge with my curators in our different departments across non-fiction, experimental, for example, and build a toolkit that allows us to start bringing in more and more projects into the national collection. But I'm aware that we need to caveat quite heavily with potential donors the ways in which we are going to approach the acquisition of these kinds of works, and how that is different to what we would be able to commit to with, say, a digital feature film. And I think developing that rhetoric and that narrative will be able to position the archive as a really, really strong, positive bet for producers and makers who are anxious about the long-term life of their assets, but without overcommitting ourselves given what we're currently resourced to do. So that's where we're at, experimental acquisition piloting. Thank you very much for bearing with us. Sorry for the technological problems. I think I probably need to get a better laptop at some point after the COVID crisis. So thanks very much for having us, and I'm looking forward to the next presentations.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was amazing. Thanks so much, guys. Ersin, you're getting a lot of love there for being such a preservation-focused artist. So yeah, thanks for that. And one thing that sprung to mind immediately is it'd be lovely, Will, to see that set of questions, and maybe, because I know that we've been working on a sort of acquisition set of questions, and so has Savannah, and so has Mark Heller over in the US, and so lovely to combine those.
Yeah, sure, happy to share.
Yeah, of course, we're sharing this as part of the project, yeah, and it would be really great to have. I think the one bit that we're missing is like sort of curatorial input into ours as well, so that would be really, really lovely for us. So yeah, thanks so much, you guys. I feel a bit bad, but I feel like maybe we need some break, but that wouldn't leave us any question time. What do you think, Tom? What should we do?
I think we're running quite a bit over, so I think we should probably take a break.
My fault, I'm sorry.
No, don't worry. Do people want to chat throughout the break? I mean, maybe, because we are recording this, so we could capture that. So
yeah,
obviously just feel free, but for anyone that wants to take a break, maybe we'll back here. We'll start again at 5:02. Does that sound good? So 13:55 in 15 minutes.
Cool.
And hopefully anybody that's got, you know, if anybody wants to ask questions, if they hold on to them, and we'll hopefully have some time for discussion at the end. Yeah, that sounds really good. Okay, thanks so much, guys, and we'll see you after a short break.
Yeah,
Thank you.
It's all right, it's all right. If anyone is still on the line and wants to ask a question of the last team, I'm happy to try and answer one. If not, I will also take a break.
Yeah, so sorry about that, Will. Just really conscious.
Oh
about
man, no. You're absolutely right. I have no idea how long I was talking to my laptop.
We were really like, well, I think, well, and it was like, yeah, it was this sort of communication breakdown. But it was great. You did. It was so good. Thank you so much.
My pleasure,
Francesca asked a question. Shall I answer here?
Yes, good idea.
Yeah. Shall I read that out quickly as well? So it's on the recording. So Francesca from Tate asked, as an artist. Oh, Francesca's there. Do you want to ask your question, Francesca?
Oh,
Yeah,
great.
bring it down. I think as an artist, how much do you think all these questions around collecting, archiving, preservation are directly or indirectly influencing your production and your mental sort of and technical freedom in making art? And if you have a question, if this is limiting your expression.
It's interesting. I suppose if the commissioning process comes up with strings where you have to archive in a specific way, which might happen, you know, after 10 years of these conversations, institutions can employ such techniques, then probably. But right now, it actually helps on the opposite side to, you know, the practitioners of time-based media often don't think about how valuable what you do can be in the future, or, you know, it's quite a kind of ephemeral thing that you're creating. So it's actually making us question how ephemeral that is, how much we want it to remain, and also the topics that we are kind of dealing with, like, you know, going and scanning a Sequoia National Park where those giant trees live, but they may not be there, or going and scanning an Amazonian a tree, and then we don't know whether that's going to be there by the end of the century. So I think there is like twofold of almost like epiphany. Is that okay? One is we have to include a strategy in the making process that doesn't necessarily limit what we do, because I think I partially accept that more of those multisensory aspects of the work cannot be preserved in the way that you design and exhibit for the first time, but the rest, how it can be also valuable and useful for future. So I'm finding it really, really useful in this state, but I don't know what happens, you know, further down the line.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm gonna go have some curry now.
Bon appetito.
Some curry. Delicious.
Yeah.
Nice.
I'll see you guys in a bit.
See you. Bye.
Bye. Enjoy.
Bye.
I'm also going to go and have some lunch, unless anyone has a question for the BFI team. No. Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Okay. I'm going to get some lunch as well. See you in a bit.